Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. So in this video we're going to take a look at Rocket Lab Past. So I actually found this interview by Rocket Lab Plab, who posted it on Twitter, and this is a speech that Peter Beck holds 14 freaking years ago when Rocket Lab was in its infancy. And you have heard me say many times that I'm so bullish on Rocket Lab based on what they have already overcome and how far they have come. And this is very interesting because you're going to see a very young Peter Beck talk about the struggles and what they are going through. This interview is 7 years before Electron. So if you're a Rocket Lab nerd, this is definitely a good video. I'm going to keep the commentary to a minimum. Please make sure you're subscribed, and let's look at the video.
My name's Peter Beck, and I design, build and launch rockets into space. People in New Zealand often forget that we're a small country in the middle of nowhere, and we've got an awful lot of satellite dishes pointing up to the sky, and we're completely reliant on space infrastructure. Whether it be a telephone call to the United States or even just jumping on the internet, it's space infrastructure that enables all that to happen. I'll just briefly tell you a little bit about Rocket Lab and the whole point to Rocket Lab. So Rocket Lab is a small private company. We're actually the only private company in the Southern Hemisphere running a space launch program, and our laboratories are based within industrial research, and we're a completely private company, but we do enjoy sharing industrial research as laboratory facilities. Now, the whole point of Rocket Lab is small suborbital launch vehicles, and these are launch vehicles to provide the public and also the science community small and limited access to space. So these launch vehicles typically carry scientific payloads such as microgravity, solar physics, and a whole lot of climate change sciences. So climate change is fantastic for our business, so bring it on as far as we're concerned. Now, if you're a scientist and you want to take in situ measurements of the atmosphere, you can get a balloon and go up to about 30 kilometres altitude. If you want to take remote sensing data, you can use satellites. But that bit above satellites, above balloons and below satellites, the only way you can actually take an in situ measurement is by a sounding rocket. And a sounding rocket is the kind of rocket that we build. It comes from the old nautical term to sound or to take measurements. So these rockets, they're about 2.5 stories tall. They weigh just over a quarter of a tonne. We can carry a maximum payload of about 70 kilos to a maximum altitude of about 250 kilometres. The International Space Station is orbiting around about 320 kilometres, so we're getting up there in altitude. But the key fundamental difference here is we're not orbital, we're suborbital. So we go up in a ballistic arc into space, and then we come back down. We don't impart enough energy to the object to go into orbit, and that's a big difference, and that's why our vehicles are quite small. This allows scientists to access space for 6 to 15 minutes, depending on what sort of trajectory they want or what sort of sciences they want to do, and it's really a low-cost way to access space. Now, along with the science community, there's also some very interesting commercial opportunities that have arisen for us. So we actually have a launch agreement signed with a company in the United States to send people's cremated remains into space and return them safely. And the way the company pitches it to their clients is if you want to go to space, you can pay $20 million and go on a Russian rocket, or you can pay $250,000 and go on Virgin Galactic's machine when it finally flies, or you can wait until you're dead and pay Rocket Lab a couple of grand. Either way, you get to space. And that company has been very successful in doing that. Along with that, we've got another agreement with a company to launch electrolytes for drinks into space. And underwear, we've had inquiries for people to send wedding rings into space, anything that means is of value to people. And that's one of the other key differences with Rocket Lab is we're all about public access to space. So everyone in this room, if they wish, can go onto our website or give us a call and say, I want to send something into space, and as long as it's dead or not a mother-in-law, we're more than happy to send it into space. And that's a really exciting thing about the commercial space industry. The space is no longer governed by a whole lot of large governments and huge bureaucracy, and it really is the place for the privateer at the moment. And that's what Rocket Lab is definitely all about. Now, just quickly, how did we end up at Rocket Lab? You don't sort of wake up one morning and say, right, I'm going to build a rocket and go to space. Rocket Lab is essentially built on 13 years of my own private research. So, if you will, I'll just jump you back 13 years ago, and I was currently at that time working for Fisher & Paykel down in Dunedin as an apprentice tool and die maker. And I decided one day it was really the engineering challenge that first attracted me to building rockets, and also the dissatisfaction with internal combustion engines. There had to be a better way to produce power. So I did a whole lot of initial research, and that's one of the key fundamental things also that ethos is carried through to Rocket Lab today, and that's do a whole lot of research, understand the physics and the engineering, and then go and do something instead of just shooting from the hip. And that's the reason why I've got all my fingers and a full head of hair and not all charcoaled up, is because you can understand all the physics behind it before you start. So that's essentially what I did, and I decided to build a small hydrogen peroxide monopropellant thruster. And Fisher & Paykel at the time were incredibly supportive of my research and my activities. And many a time I'd go into the storeroom and say, hey Trev, I need a bit of titanium for my combustion chamber, can you give us a quote from an engineering company and try and find some for me? And these pieces of titanium would just end up on my bench the next day or the next week, and I never received a quote for a piece of material yet. And they were just labelled job number apprentice project, and that was really fantastic support that Fisher & Paykel used to give me. And it paid off for them as well, because whether it's as the years went by and the rockets got more complicated, and I used more and more Fisher & Paykel's equipment and tools and analysis and everything like that, it paid off for them as well, because whether it's an injector for a rocket engine or an injector for an air brake for a dishwasher, it's the same thing. The physics are the same. So it was a complete waste of time. It was a good investment for Fisher & Paykel in the end. But anyway, after I built the small engine, it was time to make the fuel. Unfortunately, you can't just call up the phone and buy 90% proof hydrogen peroxide. The best you can do in New Zealand is 50% proof, and the rest of the percentage is all full of stabilisers that make it stable, which you don't want for rocket propulsion, and water and all sorts of other things. So even Fisher & Paykel drew the line at me commissioning a bubble reactor column and a pilot plant for manufacturing rocket fuel, so I had to take that one home. And unfortunately, I didn't have a workshop at home, but I did have a spare bedroom. So within that spare bedroom, I set up a small bubble reactor column pilot plant and started to produce my own hydrogen peroxide, and did so very successfully. And then once I achieved that goal, the next time was to scale up. Next thing to do was to scale up and make enough for rocket propulsion to actually make an engine and fire it as a test bed. So I moved my stuff outside essentially, and bought a garden shed, and really researched it thoroughly and did the best I could with the resources I had. Just little things like tying the shed down with wire ropes instead of bolting it to the ground in case you have a massive explosion. You don't end up with your shed a couple of blocks away, you just end up a mesh shed, all on wire ropes. All those little things that are actually important. So I built this pilot plant in the hydrogen peroxide shed, and when I think back these days, it would just put a P-Lab to shame. It really would. There was oilless compressors running 24/7 and vents squirting and lights going all the time as I was producing this hydrogen peroxide. But anyway, cut a long story short, produced this hydrogen peroxide, and the research for the engine was very successful, and I did some novel research in liquid catalyst beds for the hydrogen peroxide, which is a little bit unusual. But anyway, I drew the line eventually at the hydrogen peroxide because really I didn't have the facilities to undertake the research in a safe manner, and that's an important thing as well when you're mucking around with rockets. It's knowing when to pull the pin and knowing when to bail out, because you don't really get a second chance. And so anyway, what really crystallised for me was not having the safety equipment. And my chemical suit consisted of a whole lot of rubbish bags duct taped together, welding helmet, and lovely pink Madge dishwashing gloves with safety equipment. And it was in fact the pink Madge gloves that really let me down, because I got a small small leak in it and got a little bit of hydrogen peroxide on my finger, and it's very, very oxidising and a wee chemical burn, and not a serious thing at all, but enough to give me a fright. And in fact, ran inside and into the sink and run cold water over this little burn, but the issue is I still had a beaker of hydrogen peroxide in my other hand. And in my panic, I just tipped it down the sink, and I don't want to mess with this stuff anymore. Tipped it down the sink and carried on. I recommend to everybody here, if you have a beaker of 90% hydrogen peroxide in your hand, do not put it down your sink, because it causes some significant issues. And maybe there's a polymer chemist here who can tell me why, but it managed to melt every single PVC joint from my sink right down to the main pipe underneath the house.
So we go to part 2. I'm very amazed, again, how capital efficient he has been, and how much of a just read and go ahead and try to do guy this guy is. And yeah, let's begin the next one.
So I started looking at other much more safer propulsion methods, such as liquid bipropellant, quad fuels, hybrids and things like that. And over many years built lots and lots of engines, ranging from 10 newtons thrust to up to 6,500 horsepower. Was the largest one before the Artea program, before the suborbital program. And essentially, it was really a trip to the United States that spurred on the whole Rocket Lab program. And I know I'm short on time, but cut a long story short, I've been collaborating with a whole lot of people in the United States over many years. And when my wife went to go to the United States to go for work, I went over with her and went on a bit of a rocket pilgrimage, really, and went and visited all these people that I've been corresponding with, and all these companies that I'd aspired to work for or be associated with, such as Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing Rocketdyne, and all those companies. And I just rocked on up, naive as anything, and to the reception, introduced myself, and see how far I could get. And 90% of the time I got nowhere, but occasionally I hit pay dirt. NASA JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratories at NASA, I got a tour around there. But when I really hit pay dirt was when I met a guy called Carlos. And Carlos is a very interesting individual. He holds a warehouse full of rocket engines, rockets, valves and everything. And it serves as a bit of a museum almost for all the engineers at NASA and Rocketdyne, Kistler, all those people, because they come in and they pick up these old valves from the Apollo era and look at how they work and build on some of the knowledge that was already there from there. So anyway, Carlos, introduced myself to Carlos, and he says, yep, this is great. Here's my warehouse. Take as many photos as you want. Climb it all over these engines as you want. You can just spend the whole day there. So that's what I did. I spent the whole day there in Carlos's warehouse going through all these engines and all these bits of space equipment. And as I was going through it and crawling around these engines, I was starting to look at them, and they're using the same pressure transducers as me. They're using the same strain gauges as me. Climb inside some of the engines, and they're using the same injector pattern as me, same materials as me as far as I could tell. So at that point it started to, the goal of sending something to space, which evidently was always the original goal, started to think maybe it's not such a ridiculous thing after all. And Carlos suggested that I go out to the Mojave Desert and talk to the guys out at Spaceship One. So those are the guys from Virgin Galactic who sent the first private manned suborbital vehicle into space. And through Carlos's connections, he enabled me to go and visit those guys. So that's what I did, jumped in my rental car and started booting out into the Mojave Desert. And I got sort of halfway out in the middle of the Mojave Desert, and I saw a sign that said Edwards Air Force Base. And that was extremely exciting for me, because Edwards Air Force Base, this is where it's all happened. There's a NASA facility there. This is just amazing. So turned off, started off down to the Edwards Air Force Base, all very excited, till I arrived at a bit of a checkpoint, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye a sign with the crest Edwards Air Force Base and a few bits of rocket and stuff stuck there. So I quickly pulled over, got out of my car and started taking photos of this crest and this rocket, and all extremely excited. And there's nothing more sobering to temper someone's excitement than a dissatisfied man all dressed in green with an M16 over their shoulder. And he started to ask some very awkward questions. And at that point, I realised that perhaps this wasn't the best thing to be there at the time. especially in the fact that I had a boot full of rocket equipment. In fact, an LR101 rocket engine that I got from Carlos, a whole lot of books and paraphernalia, and a passport that had a whole lot of Arabic in it from a trip to Egypt a year earlier. So at that point in time, I really thought I might be spending some time in a jail here. But never underestimate the power of a New Zealand accent. And he started to ask me where I was from and Lord of the Rings and all the rest of it. But in the end, he was happy to send me on my way, but did suggest that perhaps I didn't return. But I will be back, but I'll be back as Rocket Lab and I'll be selling them something. So as I headed back out to the Mojave Desert, I managed to talk to the lead propulsion engineer of Scale Composites, so that's Virgin Galactic Spaceship One. And speaking to him, and they do a lot of their main propulsion system was a hybrid, and at that time I was doing a lot of research and work into the hybrids. And speaking to him and sitting down with him, and he had the same problems as me. He had the same problems with injector chuffing. He had the same problems with nozzle erosion. So things at that point also started to catalyse, and maybe that I wasn't that far away from being able to do what I wanted to do. So it was really on the plane flight back, really, that I decided it's time to form Rocket Lab, time to really do this. And that's great. So I arrived back in New Zealand, going to do Rocket Lab, but convincing yourself that you have the ability to do it is one thing. The second thing is you need money. You need a business case to do this sort of thing. And it was through my background at industrial research and working with some of the scientists and engineers there and in the New Zealand community that it became apparent that the whole sounding rocket or the suborbital rocket community in the Southern Hemisphere was non-existent. If you're a Southern Hemisphere scientist or a Northern Hemisphere scientist for that matter, and you want to conduct Southern Hemisphere upper atmospheric or solar physics research, you're stuffed. You can't. So essentially, Rocket Lab is entire market is the Southern Hemisphere, and it's all new market, it's all new customers. In addition to that, there's also the Northern Hemisphere, and we've received a lot of inquiries from those guys as well. So armed with a business case, a misguided ability, and all we need now is an investor, someone with some money. Now, if you go to any New Zealand venture capitalist and say, "Hi, I'm Peter Beck, I want to send a rocket into space," you don't get a very good reception, even with a good business plan. So it really took a special person to throw some money to get the program running initially, and that's a guy by the name of Mark Rocket. Now, that's not Mark's real name. He actually renamed himself Mark Rocket because he's so passionate about space. And he bought the first New Zealander to buy a ticket on the Virgin Galactic trip into space. So Mark put his money where his mouth is and threw a bit of money into the company, and I essentially sold a bit of the company to him. And that started the whole RTEA program and started the whole research and development. A little bit about the status of where we're at the moment. So as far as the whole technical development of the RTEA vehicle goes, we're essentially 2/3 done. We're moving into ground-based. We've got some ground-based testing done, such as propulsion systems, and flight testing at the moment. So we're hoping for a launch early to mid next year, all going well. One of the biggest technical issues for us, at the beginning of the program, it didn't look too bad. We could source a lot of materials and a lot of technologies out of the United States. But that, in fact, is not true. The United States have a nasty little thing called ITAR, which is Arms and Terrorist Trade Restriction Export Controls. And for a United States company to send anything out to us in New Zealand, it's incredibly difficult for them. It takes about 6 months to 1 year to get a sample out of the United States, and it costs them about $20,000 to do on average. So what that essentially means is they need to sell us at least $20,000 worth of stuff to make it worth their while. Now, we'll just take one example, which is a coating on the nose cone of the vehicle. The nose cone of the vehicle sees about 800 degrees C due to atmospheric heat, due to aerodynamic heating on the way up. Everybody else in the world, well, if you live in the United States, picks up the phone and says, "I'll have some thermal ablative coating, please." Costs you a fortune, but you can get it. We could pick up the phone, "Can we have some thermal ablative coating, please?" No way, not unless you buy a container full. That's no good for us. So essentially that put our whole development program, things like that put our whole development program well behind, because we have to develop all those technologies and those materials in-house. And that's exactly what we did with the thermal ablative coating. As we looked at all the scientific papers and the prior art about it, and we also dug up everybody's patent to make sure they weren't infringing on anybody. understood the physics and the science of what's going on behind it, and developed their own. And the ironic thing is now that we're fielding inquiries from the United States to buy our thermal ablative coating. In fact, we've even got an inquiry from the Kennedy Space Center to line one of the troughs, the launch troughs, on part of their launch pad infrastructure. So it really backfired for old George on that one, but it does give us that little bit more IP and capability. The biggest challenge for Rocket Lab is funding, keeping the beast fed. It's a constant struggle for us dealing with New Zealanders and New Zealand government. New Zealand government's been pretty supportive, but especially the general public of New Zealand, venture capitalists and the like, anybody who wants to potentially have an involvement in the program, is getting across that hurdle that New Zealand can actually participate in space. It doesn't cost billions of dollars to participate in space, and everywhere in space this is just, like we said before, fundamental global infrastructure, and it's not a fringe activity. And that's the real challenge for us, is changing people's perception that that space is something that New Zealand can actually participate in, and participate in very well.
So that was the two videos, and oh my god, how far they have come. At this time, he only had one investor. It was before the Arthia program. He was growing before Rocket Lab. He was so passionate about rockets that he was growing rocket fuel in his extra bedroom. That is nuts. And he had to develop everything himself because you couldn't get it from the US and because of different trade protections. And he still has made it into what the company became today. I just want to check. I'm going to pause the video if I can. Let me see. No, I cannot. My recording software doesn't work, because this video, he said that they're planning to launch Arthia the year after, so like next year, and this interview was in 2010, so I just want to see how good they kept that timeline. And now you're going to see me do it because I can't pause the video. Okay, maybe the timing is off on this because it says 2009, or they were early compared to the, because you see here it says 14 years ago. I mean, I know that YouTube doesn't differentiate between, like, it doesn't show how many months. So we are in 2024, it could be in 2023, and 14 years would be 2009. But still, he said that the test flight would be done in 2010. So that bodes well, because I wanted to see, like, what's their track record on, you know, adhering to rocket development schedules. But again, you know, everybody's worried about Neutron, and this guy has created Arthia out of literally the thin air. Like, he was making the fuel himself, he was developing the heat shield and everything because he couldn't buy it from the US, and he made it on reasonably on time. I mean, it looks like here he was a year early. Then they developed Electron, and you know, they bought a ton of space systems companies, successfully integrated them into Rocket Lab, and now they're on to the third rocket. So that's like saying, maybe it's not the best comparison, but you know, like Tesla has developed the Model S and X, and then they developed the 3 and Y, and now they're going to the next generation car. Do you have any doubt that Tesla is going to deliver on this? No, because they have a very good track record. So it's very similar to me. With Rocket Lab, zero doubt. Maybe the timeline is going to be off a little bit. Probably it will. It's a rocket program, but I'm really not worried. So let me know if you watched this far. Please comment below that you have seen the whole video, and let me know if you got value out of it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. And let me see if I can stop this somehow. Yeah, I can. Goodbye.